All right. Hello and welcome to Elite Minds, our interview with former professional cricket player David Dawson. So welcome, David.
Thanks, Dave. Good to see you.
Good
Great
to
to be
see
here.
you. Obviously, we've got a strong history together, having lived together in Tasmania and um, played together quite a bit over a period, probably 15 years ago now. And, it's was a great part of our lives. And, you obviously spent a lot of time together then. But now you've obviously moved on to, you now live in Sydney, where you run a very successful cricket program called Pro Performance Cricket.
That's it. That's it. Exactly right.
Beautiful. So today I just wanted to, I guess, reflect on your career and, from a young age, when your cricket journey really kicked off. And I guess, listen to some of the lessons that you learned and I guess some of the little pearls of wisdom that you'd like to be able to pass on to some of the up and coming athletes. Doesn't matter what sport you play. I think there's lots of lessons that we can learn from listening to people like yourself. So I guess the first thing is, tell us about, the early years when you first started playing cricket. Was cricket your main sport? Did you do other sports?
Yeah. I grew up with two older brothers and an older sister, but my older brothers were cricketers. My father played cricket for Sydney Uni when he was studying and played at a reasonable level before he went off to study medicine and eventually become a GP or a doctor. So I played a lot with my brothers in the backyard. They were a fair bit older than I was, so there was a fair bit of an age gap. So I wanted to try and compete with the older boys playing in the backyard. We'd play what we called pool cricket, where my brothers would skim the ball off the pool at pace, and I'd try and whack it over the fence or whatever. So I guess in that way, my family was a crickety family. So I started playing the game at 5 or 6 or something like that. But we were sporty in general. So it wasn't just that. I played soccer in the winter months. I had a go at tennis and golf and played a bit of rugby at school. And we were always doing lots of different things sporting wise. So it wasn't just cricket, but definitely I played a lot of cricket from the ages of sort of 5 or 6 in Canberra where I grew up.
Awesome. And how would you describe yourself as a 10-year-old competing in whether it's soccer or cricket? Were you a fierce competitor? Or were you one that sort of sat back and observed? Can you recall?
I think I definitely had some competitive spirit in me. I mean, I was prone to getting a bit upset with my brothers if I was ever out in the backyard. So I think my competitive spirit was forged at a young age, trying to compete with my older brothers. I probably wasn't the greatest of sports when I got out as a youngster in the backyard. I'm sure there's plenty of little tantrums my brothers could tell you about. So I think in that sense, that sort of lit a bit of a competitive fire within me to want to compete and want to keep up with my older bros, which kind of flowed into my sport in general, I guess.
Yeah. And at what age did you things start to get a bit more competitive? I assume in early years you just play, you just love it, you have lots of fun. And at some point you try it for representative teams and try to play in stronger competitions. Do you recall when that started for you?
Yeah, I do. I remember I was playing a game of cricket I must have been under 11s or something like that. And one of the coaches said, "Hey, there's tryouts for the ACT junior side or the ACT reps as they're probably called now.
Yep.
Do you want to try out?" And I was like, "Sure, absolutely. I'll give it a go." And I remember going out to Queanbeyan, and Daryl McDonald was the coach who's now I've had a bit to do with over many, many years, but his son now, Blake's playing for New South Wales.
Yep.
And doing really, really well. So Daryl was one of the great coaches in the ACT when I was a kid, and Daryl was running a little junior rep program out there, and we went out, and I was all nervous and did all these drills and whatever. And I was like, I remember clearly, I was really desperate to make that side. It was the ACT under, I think it might have been the under 12s was where it started. or perhaps under 13, under 12s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
my brothers had made that side. So my brothers were sort of saying, oh, we made that side. And so I desperately wanted to kind of be a bit like them. I remember that sort of comparison.
yes, yeah,
And as was the day, I got a letter in the mail from ACT Cricket, and I remember it coming and addressed to me, and I opened it up and I quickly scanned through the pages and saw that I'd been selected, and I was just absolutely pumped. It obviously meant
yeah,
a lot to me. I can still sort of feel the elation of making that squad or that
yeah,
side, and yeah, that was a big moment for a young player. And I remember getting my little jacket and my little ACT hat and all those sorts of things. And um, still, I guess I was still only a young guy, so I wasn't, I didn't have any aspirations at that stage
yeah.
to 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 go any further as such. I wasn't really thinking big picture, but I was really, stoked as a young guy to get into that little rep team. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
the big thing for
fantastic.
me when I was 11 or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, I know from my own cricket experience, it was something similar, and it's kind of that age where the mind starts to think more about what's coming up and what it means to play in these teams, and other people are starting to watch maybe a bit more closely. Do you recall sort of thinking about that type of thing, or conversations with parents, anything like that?
Not at that younger age. I remember I started to feel pressure, perhaps, or anxiety for the first time, perhaps around um, maybe the under 13s or 14s. I guess in that age and stage of my development, I hadn't kind of come across those expectations or feelings of anxiety leading into games and playing and whatnot. So that was
Yeah,
a new experience and a new pressure that I hadn't always experienced.
yep,
Which I never quite got fully control of until I was a little bit older. Because I remember as the pressure increased, as I started to play in the ACT under 17s and 19s and go to these like national carnivals and the like, my anxiety was quite high leading into some of those games, to the point where I was even, physically sick prior to,
wow,
back in the under 17s and things like that. So there was a process of trying to manage that anxiety throughout my career as a whole, but it first sort of reared itself around those as the pressure started to mount a bit with the national carnivals and things like that.
yeah. Well, can you, going back a little while, can you recall what sort of, if it had an impact on your performance?
Um, it's hard to really quantify it. I mean, in some ways, it obviously meant a lot to me, these competitions. So I was up for the challenge, but
Yeah,
um, I definitely wasn't not focused, if that makes sense. If anything,
yeah,
I was too hyper focused, or too anxious leading into these things. So, I mean, I can't say that it was beneficial, but I can't say that it was too detrimental. I think I just
yeah,
tipped over that anxiety level a bit too far, to the point where, occasionally I was feeling a bit unwell. But
yeah,
um, in a perfect world, I would have been um, keeping those arousal levels in control, and being in a more positive frame of mind, I guess.
yeah, yeah. Well, yes, I mean, nerves are a positive thing. It shows that you care, shows that you want to do well. It's like when those nerves become so great that um, there's that fear of performing, and you don't execute your skills at the best you can. That's when it can become a problem. But yeah, nerves in itself is not a problem. It's just how we learn to manage that. So I guess as you progress through and you went on to play for Tasmania and New South Wales, um, let me know if I've missed any key moments. Tassie under 17, I mean, sorry, not Tassie, Australian under 17 squad. As you progress through that, were there strategies that you remember adopting to help you deal with those nerves, or something to focus on, perhaps?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I remember I had a reasonably good under-17 national carnival, and I was selected in the Australian under-17 squad. Geez, that must have been 97 or something like that. And the members of that squad, we had quite a strong squad. It was Sean Marsh and Ed Cowan and Mitchell Johnson and a lot of these guys that went on to have great careers and play for Australia. And so being in and around the elite players of my age group at that time really helped boost my confidence a lot.
Yeah.
So when I was to return back to the ACT, I mentally had put myself in a more positive kind of confident frame of mind. Just merely the fact that I thought, okay, I'm competing with some of the best players in the country now. And so when I went back to my smaller pond, so to speak, I really put myself mentally on a bit of a pedestal, which I think helped to that framing just helped to increase my self-belief and confidence when I was playing locally. And it also opened my eyes to think, okay, I really started to think bigger picture and thought, okay, well, if I'm one of the better players at this stage as a 16-year-old, where could I get to in the future? And so I started to open my mind to the notion of perhaps trying to be a professional cricketer.
Yeah. It's very interesting to hear you talk, and you can hear that self-belief come through. You talked about a smaller pond, and you know where you come from. So there's a clear self-belief that you had developed as a result of that. And it's interesting because I had a conversation, someone asked me about my cricket, what were the lessons that I had learnt. And one of the things I reflect on was, the ability to take that self-belief and take it to the next stage, even if the evidence isn't as evident, that you're able to carry that self-belief that you are good enough, that you are, one of the best going around, and carry that to the next level so that you are playing with that same freedom.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept that I'm always thinking through this when I'm coaching young players now. Like all of the best guys that I played cricket with, and I was lucky enough to play with a lot of guys in Tasmania, as you were, that went on to play for Australia. And when I played for New South Wales, I mean, the star-studded lineups I was lucky enough to play with a lot of guys that had amazing careers for Australia, or are still having amazing careers for Australia, with the likes of Steve Smith and Paddy Cummins and Josh Hazlewood and Starkey and these guys.
Yeah.
And the guys that we played with in Tasmania, George Bailey and Alex Doolan and Tim Payne and all these guys, the one sort of factor that really stood out from a psychological perspective with these guys that I really saw was they had a real unshakable sense of belief and that they were good enough to play for Australia and they were going to make it.
Yeah.
Even in the face of reality, in some sense, if they weren't playing well, or they had a few failures, or they had a bad net session, or things may not appear that way.
Yeah.
There was a deep down sense of belief that they could do it. And where that comes from is interesting and open for discussion and being able to harness that and learn how to create that sense of self-belief and confidence in one's ability is really the key, I think, to achieving amazing things. And it's almost about not setting a limit to what you can achieve. It's like those once you've set a bar, your brain goes, oh, okay, I'm there, and that's it. And anything beyond that is seemingly beyond your ability.
Yeah.
But I believe that the guys that we played with that really achieved their full potential didn't set a bar on what they could achieve.
Yeah.
Whether that be consciously or subconsciously.
Yeah.
That sense of just like, I can do anything, didn't allow their minds to sort of inhibit where they were trying to get to.
Yeah. There's a sense of destiny.
Yeah.
What came across when you could listen to them speak? and how they carried themselves as well. We talk about body language. It was really evident. I still remember walking into the gym and overhearing a conversation of Tim Payne with another teammate, and it was evident. It was not a case of if he would play for Australia, it was a case of when.
Yeah.
And I think you're spot on when you talk about limits, and part of the program, creating a performance mindset is around setting those goals that are outside of your reach, but also supporting that with a self-image that doesn't set those limits on what you can achieve. It's also, I think, a relevant point for parents around that is, from the age of 10, like we don't know where that young person can end up. Their potential is there. What we don't want to do is set the limit on where they could get to.
Yeah.
They could play for Australia. They could be in the Olympics. But the moment the environment says, oh, you can't do that, that's not you, that starts to form that belief pattern and that self-image at that point. And
what I say to a lot of the kids that I coach now who've got a bit of talent, I say, from a cricketing perspective, look, somebody's got to play for Australia in the next 10 to 20 years, 10 to 15 years. I mean, someone's going to be doing it. So why not be you? Like there'll be a team. Just trying to plant a seed of not setting a limitation upon what can be achieved. I mean, I was at the Cricket Academy in 2001 with a lot of guys again that went on to play for Australia. And one of the guys there was Hilfy, Ben Hilfenhaus, who we both know really well and also we're mates with. And Hilfy was suffering from some back issues at the time, and he was doing a lot of rehab, and he wasn't quite in the main sort of setup of that whole squad. He was a little bit on the outer. And if somebody had said to me then that, Ben would end up being one of, Tasmania's finest ever bowlers and play however many tests Hilfy ended up playing and being, a magnificent player for Australia in all formats.
Yep.
I mean, you just wouldn't have guessed it. And there's so many stories like that. And being around all those guys at these academies over the years, I mean, I can tell you 5 to 10 guys like that. You think, oh man, I just never would have, no one would have imagined what could have been achieved. I mean, there are a few destined players, that they stand out a bit, but there are a lot of players that come through and peak and have amazing careers in any sport that may not have been, touted at a young age. And so I try to encourage all of the young players that I'm coaching, not that it's about trying to, always play for Australia or whatever, but just don't set a limitation on what you can achieve. And you never know, like, shoot for the stars and see what you can do.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great message. So David, tell us about some of the big triumphs that you recall in your career, some of the really fun memories. From a performance point of view, hundreds or your debut, particularly for Tasmania, was a memorable one.
Yeah, look, that was a special moment. I was lucky enough to score 100 on my first class debut, which was a bit of a whirlwind period, really. I mean, to get selected to make your first class debut first and foremost was a dream. I'd always dreamed of playing first class cricket, and coming from the ACT, coming from Canberra, we didn't have a first class team. And so I had to leave state to pursue that dream. And then I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to go down to Tasmania after playing well for the ACT for a few years. The ACT team played in the national second 11 competition, which they're now doing again. And coming back from the Cricket Academy, I felt confident in my smaller pool, and I was able to perform really well for the ACT and score a lot of runs in that second 11 competition. And then I was lucky enough to get a rookie contract with Tasmania at a time when a lot of young, great Tassie players were coming through. George Bailey, Xavier Doherty, Tim Payne, Hilfy, all of these guys were coming through all of a similar age to me. And I came down and joined that sort of crop of next young players with the goal of playing for Tasmania. And so fast forward a couple of years later, and I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to make my debut. And it all just kind of worked well for me. It was a bit of a culmination of a lot of hard work. I got a little bit of luck in the innings. I mean, I was caught off a no ball, and I was dropped early, and all these sorts of things. So, you know, in some ways, it was a little bit destined to be. Yeah, and I was fortunate enough to get 100 on debut and carry my bat through that innings. End up not out at the end of it, and you look, it was just a dream come true. And then really just kind of set me off on a path of being a professional for some years after that.
Yeah, fantastic. Tell us about goal setting. Was that something you were really active in doing as you, I guess, came back from cricket academies and represented, Australian under-17s?
Yeah.
What role did that play?
Yeah, at some point in my later teens, I wrote down a bit of a vision, a bit of a pathway that I thought I might have to follow in order to get to playing first class cricket and hopefully one day play for Australia. And I wrote it down in little steps. I had to score some, how many runs I thought I had to score for the ACT in order to try and get an opportunity to go elsewhere. And then I knew I'd have to play in the second team for Tasmania, and I'd have to score a certain number of runs there.
Yep.
So on and so on and so on. My goal was to try and make the Australian under-19 side after I made the under-17 squad.
Yep.
And I didn't get there. And it was a bit of a disappointment for me. I really wanted to try and make that team, the Australian under-19 team, is the side that all young players try to make. And I didn't have the tournament and the performance that I wanted. I for various reasons, I didn't perform to the best of my ability. The opportunities changed a little bit within the ACT framework, and I was competing with another player to get the wicket-keeping position for the ACT under-19s, and the management changed a bit, and it didn't quite go as smoothly as I would have liked, and I didn't perform to the level I would like to have in the under-19s, and therefore I didn't make the side. Yep. And that was disappointing. It's desperately what I wanted to do, but it's a very difficult side to make. I mean, there's a lot of magnificent young players coming through, and so there's, it's not a given that anybody's going to just walk into that team. You've got to perform well, and you've got to be a great young player. But what I did do is I didn't give up. I went back to the ACT, and I knuckled down and focused on scoring as many runs as I could at club level and as many runs as I could for the ACT Comets, as they were called. And then I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to get into a state system in that different sort of route. I originally thought that I'd have to make the Aussie 19s and then I'd get picked up somewhere, hopefully to go to another state.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to go to the Australian Cricket Academy, which again gave me a great grounding in terms of playing with these great players, training with these great players, competing with them, for 6 months. And then coming back to the ACT and with the goal of performing as well as I possibly could. And then I was fortunate enough to get noticed.
It's a great story of, well, not giving up firstly, but throughout any career, maybe there's some careers, like you said, there might be the destined players perhaps where things do go like to the letter all the way through. But more often than not, there's going to be some setbacks and you're going to want to play for a team or represent a team, and that doesn't happen. So I guess using that experience, what advice would you say to those young players that, when that does happen to them, how do they respond best?
I think a great quote that comes to me is failures are just a stepping stone to success. And as you say, there is no direct path, even for the greatest players. I mean, even Ricky Ponting got dropped, and Michael Clarke and all these legends, Steve Smith, they've all had well-documented ups and downs in their careers. And so whether it be at the top it's noticeable, or at juniors or reps or club or whatever it might be, there's always going to be some hurdles and some stepping stones that you're going to have to go through. The key is just to keep going, is to just assess where you're at, and then focus on the process in order to get to the next destination. And that's as much as it hurt not making the under 19 side or what have you. I just didn't give up. I was just committed to do whatever it takes, leave no stone unturned type mentality to achieve what I wanted to achieve. And then I just kept moving forward in that direction. And having that goal, having that pathway allowed me to have a framework through which I could see where I was in regards to that journey and make improvements to myself, be it physically or technically or mentally, to try to be a better cricketer, which in turn helped me develop some resilience and some skills in order to be a better person. And it's a lot of those skills, I think, now which I call upon to help in other areas of my life, being a dad, or running a business, or managing my staff, or dealing with, my relationships in whatever context. So it's a bit of a cliche, but it is about the journey in the end more than the destination. Obviously, I would have loved to have played for Australia, and I did everything in my power to do that. And I got to play for Tasmania and New South Wales, which I'm proud of, and that's amazing. But the skills I learned along that journey are really what the little diamonds are in that whole process, because it's those that have shaped who I am as a coach and a dad and a friend and a husband and all that sort of stuff now. So it's inevitable you're going to have the ups and downs, but the key is to learn from any of these moments in your life, be it through in a sporting context or with relationships or what have you, and learn from it and move forward and keep going.
Yeah, it's a great message. And you think you want to get to that point where and it's difficult in the moment, but actually appreciate those challenging times and those difficulties, and find the joy in it, find the positives that come as a result. One of the things, and I've never said this to you, David, but I was always very, very impressed and proud of you in the way that when you went from Tasmania and you had to make the move to another state, and you moved to New South Wales, and you then got the opportunity to represent them. That must have thrown some challenges your way at that point in life.
Yeah, look, that was really difficult. I mean, I had dreamt my whole life of being a professional cricketer, and my whole self-image and self-worth in some sense was wrapped up in being a professional cricketer. And when I lost my contract in 2009, I think I'd been contracted to Tassie for the last 6 or 7 years or so. It was a real shock to my system. I mean, I deserved to be dropped. I wasn't scoring runs. I had sort of got myself into a bit of a false sense of security in that squad, probably. Perhaps I had a sense of entitlement that I deserved to have an opportunity to have more of a go. But if truth be told, I didn't score enough runs at the first class level, and Tassie wanted to go in a different direction. And as hard as that was, in the cold light of day, that was the correct call from Tassie cricket. But I didn't deal with it well at all. I was really upset, and a little bit depressed, probably, to be honest. It was a really difficult time for me, because if I wasn't a cricketer, what was I? Who am I? All those sorts of thoughts. I mean, I'd done some study. I mean, I did quite well at school, and I had other interests, no doubt, but my whole career and life was wrapped up with being a professional cricketer. So I really had to start from scratch again. I moved up to Sydney with my now wife, Shana. We'd been going out for a year or two, so it was a big move for her as well. I was lucky my brother and sister live in Sydney, so I was closer to them in a sense. But I really had to start again. I still had the burning desire to continue to be a professional and play cricket professionally again, and I set my sights on playing for New South Wales as a bit of a dream, I suppose. As a young kid, I remember going to watch the Canberra Comets play New South Wales at Manuka Oval, and I thought to myself, that's just amazing, beyond what I thought I might be able to achieve. Watching the greats of New South Wales cricket running around, and then I set my sights on achieving that, and I put everything into it to try and get there. And in some ways, that was a lesson in itself, because I probably tried a little too hard to really make an impact up here in Sydney. And I actually
When you say tried a little too hard, what does that mean? What
I
does
just
that look
wanted
like?
it too much, I think, and I was playing with a fire in the belly that was burning too hot, if that makes sense. I wanted to sort of almost prove a point to um, the Tassie guys or what have you. I was kind of playing for the wrong reasons, and the pressure that came with that stifled my performance. And I didn't have a great first season of grade cricket. I did okay, but not enough to really turn any heads.
And how did you shift that?
Honestly, I got a little bit more balance in my life. I got a job working in corporate health, so I was working essentially 9 to 5, um, dealing with a different realm of the world. I learned some valuable lessons actually. I was dealing with some of the top echelon of corporate people in Sydney, CFOs of big banks and important corporate leaders and things like that. And I realized that we're all in our own little bubble. Um, and these people who were revered in their own worlds, I, respectfully couldn't really care less what, they did in their career,
Yeah.
respectfully. And vice versa, when I said, oh, if they were to know that I played with Ricky Ponting or something like that, they'd be like, oh, that's great. But, their world
Yeah.
is caught up in their own world.
Yeah.
And so I realized that there was more to life than just, playing cricket, and everybody is sort of caught up in their own little bubble of importance. And it helped me get perspective to play the game without too much expectation or pressure. And I literally just started to play a game with more of a sense of enjoyment and freedom. And that culminated in me having a really sort of a breakout season in Sydney grade cricket. I scored over 1,000 runs one season just at the right time. The timing was important, because at the time that I started to peak again with my performance, opportunities started to arise with New South Wales. Simon Kadich retired. Uzi Khawaja moved to Queensland. Phil Hughes went to South Australia. Phil Jakes retired. So 4 of the best top order batsmen in New South Wales departed, and that opened up an opportunity for me to get a chance. So there was a little bit of luck, but it was culminated in me playing really well, having kind of released the pressure on myself to perform. I just had sort of in some sense given up. I was like, look, I'm just going to play and do my best, and if what will be will be. And with that attitude came a much improved performance. And then I was lucky enough to debut for New South Wales 2 years or so after I'd left Tassie, 2 or 3 years. And then it was culminated actually. I was lucky enough to get a 100 in the one-day competition against Tasmania at Bellerive Oval, playing for New South Wales. And it was a really sweet moment. And there wasn't any sense of malice or I told you so or anything like that. I was fully over it, but it was a nice moment to be able to perform at that level again.
Yeah.
Um, and somewhat sweet against my mates from Tassie,
Yeah.
but really not with any. I was over the I'd grown up a bit from the dropping. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, lots of, I mean, it was a great, remarkable result. And I remember clearly when you made 100 at Belrive that day against Tassie. Um, Really interesting that perspective that you'd come to where you said you talked about getting that enjoyment and playing for the enjoyment again, and how we balance that with we're setting those goals and we want to strive to get the best out of ourselves, yet maintain that perspective. And do you have any thoughts around how you see young 15, 16-year-olds being able to sort of manage both of those to get to that point of getting the best out of themselves, but at the same time keeping the enjoyment and perspective at the right level? Because the sport is about fun,
Yeah.
but it can be challenging, and I know I found that a challenge as well to get the
Yeah.
balance where it needs to be.
Yeah, look, it's challenging, and I don't think it's a black and white answer for any individual. I think everybody's a little bit different. When I got dropped from Tassie, I sent an email to Justin Langer. I had come across Justin a few times through mutual friends over the years when I was playing in England and the like, and I seeked a bit of counsel from him, and I remember him saying to me, "Look, you've got to train like you give a shit, so you can play like you don't." And what he meant by that was put in all the time and effort on the things that you can control. And then when you go out and play, you've just got to let that time that you've spent preparing, now's the time to let it go and just let your instincts and let your subconscious, in a sense, just play.
Yep.
And it was that notion just gave me some freedom to be, okay, I've done all I can. Now I'm just going to play for the sake of playing. And
Yep.
it's hard to do. It's hard to sort of get that level of trust in your game and in your performance, but there's no doubt that your own mind gets in the way often. And it's a bit of a skill to try and get out of your own way. Um,
Yep.
and the only way to achieve that is to prepare the best that you can so that you can just let go. Because
Yep.
if you don't quite prepare to the best of your ability, there might be that nagging voice that is saying, "Oh, did I? Could I? Should I? Whatever."
Yeah.
Um,
There's a good interview I watched with Michael Phelps, the American swimmer,
yeah,
and when it came to race day, he knew that he had ticked every box in terms of his physical preparation. He was a big one for visualization. So he ticked all the boxes from a mental point of view. So when it came to race day, he was just jumping in the pool and letting it happen,
yeah,
not thinking about what was happening in the race, who his competitors were. It was race day. He'd done everything he possibly could. So it allowed him that freedom to just swim.
yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying there.
I think that's the lesson, and that's the mindset we've got to get to. It's not easy to do, but um, there's no doubt that we all play our best, perform our best, be it sport or study or what have you, when we're in that sort of state of flow. We're allowing ourselves just to perform to the best of our ability without any limitations. There's no doubt we have to train and prepare the best we possibly can, and that's an important part of any performance, be it sport or study or music or whatever. But when it comes to executing in the moment, the key is to just let that flow happen in the moment, if possible.
Yeah.
And I think through your program, it helps these conversations through Elite Minds. It helps start these conversations because it's a skill that needs to be learned. It's not something, sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes we fall into flow. I ask kids all the time, when they score runs, and I was like, magnificent. What were you thinking about? And they'll say nothing. They'll go, I wasn't thinking about
Yeah.
anything. I was just playing.
Yeah.
I'm like, exactly. Exactly. So what we need to try to do is create that freedom in our minds, that headspace to be clear, with that clarity to just perform. And towards the back end of my career, that's all I really tried to focus on, just having my mind clear so that I could react, because I'd spent 20 years plus working on my technique and all different things. And I knew that if I was in the clearest headspace as the ball in our sport was about to be bowled, I was giving myself the best opportunity to play that ball the best I possibly could. And so irrespective of whether I was scoring runs or not, the process was just getting back to having a clear mind. Again, name dropping, but Michael Bevan, as you know, was one of our coaches in Tassie when we were there. And Bevo, you know, an interesting thinker and a different sort of guy on the game. But he mentioned to me towards the back end of his career, he played with us at Tassie, and he had that year when he scored 1,400 shield runs in 8 games or something. He missed a couple of games because his body was falling apart and what have you. And I remember picking his brain that season saying, Bev, what's your process? You know, what's going on in your mind? And he literally said, as soon as he crossed that white line, all he was focusing on was having a clear mind. And he had his game plan set in his mind before he'd walk out, and he'd go, I just have a clear mind. And then he'd just back himself, essentially. Yeah. And it's almost like he'd gone full circle in his own career. Obviously had an amazing career for Australia in the one-day team, played Test cricket. It came down to Tasmania with almost a carefree attitude that his career was almost coming to an end. And he's just like, I'm just going to play with freedom. Yeah. And as a result, he had one of the all-time seasons in the history of Australian cricket. But the message and the messages are the same. He played with freedom. He had clarity in his mind. He'd obviously done a lot of training and a lot of work, but then he just trusted his game at that back end of his career to allow himself to play with that freedom. Whereas in the past, he said he was often a little bit, you know, he played Test cricket and had some limitations or some difficulties that he placed upon his own mind with the short ball and all these things that were documented.
Yeah.
But I mean, he absolutely nailed the short ball when I played with him for Tassie. I mean, he absolutely crunched it. And because he just kind of let go of that expectation and that limitation in his own mind. So even the greats of the game, right, the best that have ever played, guys like Bevo and these guys, go through limitations and challenges in their own mindset.
Yeah.
But it shows that the clarity that is necessary to achieve everyone's potential.
Yeah. I mean, you've nailed it there, and that's the motivation behind this program, behind Elite Minds' existence, is to create some awareness around that at a younger age. Because as you talk about some of the greats and the greats that I've played with, everyone talks about that mental side of the game, that sometimes our thoughts can get in the way of our performance, and we can doubt ourselves, and that's a real hindrance on performance. And you know, again, that's where our online program is designed to create some awareness and start opening the mind into some strategies to create some self-belief and to, you know, help players reflect on, okay, what was I thinking about before the game or in training that might be preventing me backing myself in those key moments.
Yeah, and look, it's amazing to have a program like this accessible and available for young players. I think the more these conversations can start at an earlier age, the concepts hopefully get ingrained earlier, and the mental processes and strategies can be formed at a younger age, or at least developed progressively from an earlier position. It just would have been gold to have this sort of stuff at a younger age, to help with us as young players, obviously, but also as young men coming through.
Yeah. Well, Dawson, thanks so much for your time, being so open with sharing your story. I think there's great wisdom there. No doubt your coaching clients are well served with you coaching them. And we look forward to talking again soon.
Thanks, Dave. My pleasure, mate. Great to chat, and love to the family, and talk to you soon.
Likewise. Cheers, Dawes.
See you, mate.